meeting of the Mississippi State Board of Medical Licensures Ad Hoc Committee on Hospice Regulations to order. I'm Dr. Dan Nedney of Vicksburg, appointed the chairperson of the Ad Hoc Committee. And so we have most of our members today: Dr. Dustin Gentry, Dr. Justin Turner, Dr. Tom Joyner, our president, Dr. Jerry Ann Houston, also is serving and was with us at our first meeting. So this is our second meeting. Let's see. Here we go. Well, I had my points up. What I'd like to do, and any members of the public, welcome. We're glad you're here. With agreement of the committee members, what I would like to do is to take the policy points that we discussed at length, I think almost a 2-hour meeting, and I had sent out to everyone kind of a, just a bullet point statement on how I heard things, and just try to put it in some type of order where we can discuss it. And what I'm hoping we can do today is just kind of go down that list and talk as a group and make sure we have consensus on the issue of policy. It's not our job to write language, but we've been asked by the board to present recommendations to the Rules and Regs Legislative Committee. And what I'm hoping we can do is, when we finish today, that we have consensus on how things should go. We discussed at length at our first meeting the problems that the board has been needing to deal with, and that we do have complaints relating to hospice issues, and we do need regulatory authority to deal with those complaints, but we want to do so in a thoughtful way that holds those who are not practicing good medicine accountable, and yet not put any unnecessary burden on physicians who are trying to do the right thing. So we kind of, we came to an understanding that this is necessary, but to see what we can do to offer the Rules and Reg Committee specifically, and the board generally, some consensus issues, so that the confusion that we had last year won't happen. And I had those bullet points up, and for some reason they disappeared. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So does that, and then I talked with Dr. Charlie Miles, who's the chairman of the Rules and Reg Committee, about the process. And my thoughts were, after we come to an agreement on kind of the policy issues of, how the board, how we recommend the board look at regulating these practices, then Dr. Tom Joyner actually serves on that committee, and Dr. Joyner and I can present our recommendations and findings to the Rules and Reg Committee and let them take it from there. So does that sound like a reasonable approach for today's meeting?
Yep.
Okay. Does everyone have the email that was the takeaway points from our first meeting?
I do.
If you can pull those up, then what I would like to do, we kind of knocked it out in broad categories, and then had bullet points under each category of issues that were brought up by the committee that kind of needed to be dealt with, or maybe could even be dealt with in a better way. So the first point A, relating to attending physicians. Point 1 was that attending physicians the attending physician should be the main physician in the patient's life when in hospice care. And Dustin, that was addressing points that you brought up. I think we all agreed upon that attending physicians should not just be plucked out of the air and forced upon a patient and their families, but when at all possible, it should be, well, anytime there's an attending physician, that physician is directing the care of the patient and should be seen by the patient and their family as the main physician in their life. Any issues on bullet point 1? All right, 2, CMS regulations reflect that having an attending physician that is the patient's primary physician is preferred. It is the patient's right. We talked about that. That is a CMS regulation. I think the board would fully support that the patient has the right to choose who's the attending, not the hospice agency. There are times, it's not uncommon at all that they ask for the hospice attending, but it should be the patient's right to choose. Any issues there? Okay. Point 3, it is inappropriate and against the true nature of the IDG model for a hospice to push out the attending physician that the patient knows from the model of care. We've actually had complaints about that, I believe, and Dustin, that was an issue that you were bringing up. So, and that also, I believe, is an issue with CMS regulations. Any issues there? So that just basically reflects too that it's the patient's right to choose, not the hospice agency's authority to choose. They don't have the authority to do it without the patient choosing.
And I believe that CMS is physician also.
Yes. 4, circumventing the attending physician is not in the best interest of the patient. Now, again, these are not necessarily put here to propose that we put into the regulatory language. I'm just making sure we all agree on these principles. Okay. So circumventing the attending physician is not in the best interest of the patient. We've had complaints about that. Everybody thumbs up?
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, under the attending physicians, when there is not an attending physician with an established physician-patient relationship serving on the IDG, a proper relationship needs to be established by a physician member of the team.
Yes.
That what we talked about, everybody kind of hear that the same way I did? Okay. So again, just like CMS says, it's preferable for the long-term primary care physician to be the attending, but if that is not possible, and if I'm part of the IDG team and I'm going to assume the attending role, then if no one has ever seen the patient on my team, that patient, I need to establish a proper relationship as I attend that patient. We're going to talk, we got the points further down, as we're talking about how to establish a proper relationship. So any comments on attending physician? Are we all in agreement?
Yes.
Dustin, you're muted, buddy.
I'm so sorry. I'm in agreement with all those things. The frustrating thing is that when the hospice nurses admit, they can always say, don't you want, our so-and-so to be the attending? And I just don't think that you can tell people what to do, but you may not be able to really, if they really want to get the attending out of the picture, there's ways they can do that even within the rules. And that's just you just kind of have to trust people to do the right thing on that issue.
Yeah. There's always somebody who's going to try to color outside the lines. You're right. And, that's why the board needs to have authority and regulatory guidance on how to handle that to the best of our ability. Any other comments on attending physicians?
That that is a point of education that I think that we can, support with this ruling, and then Family Practice Association, MSMA, and such should make sure that the public out there understands that. Or caregivers understand that.
So Dustin, in that situation, what I would personally do
Mhm.
is, once we have whatever final rules or regs to deal with this stuff, if I am intentionally cut out, I mean, these are folks I know, them, their families. I'll pick up the phone and say, hey, what happened?
Yeah.
And if they tell me the hospice agency, said we needed to have somebody else, then all of a sudden I'm picking up the phone and calling Dr. Cleveland, or it. But the other thing is I work closely with all the agencies in my community. And if a patient chooses another agency than the one that I work with, I'm happy to attend for that agency, to be the primary attendant for my patient on another agency and work well with them. They know if they, in my opinion, if they try to cut me out without talking to me and asking me, then that's unethical behavior, and I'm not going to deal with them anymore.
Right.
That's right.
And they know
we
it.
also have to watch for our own repeating patterns, but this can be done at every level, whether it's a hospice, nursing home, or it's your clinic, or any of those things.
Yeah, it's going to be a sketchy agency that is not wanting the primary care physician to remain attending.
Right.
And hey, Tom, I'm having a hard time with your audio. Am I the only one?
No, sir, I can't hear him very well either.
I can't either.
I think if he would turn his head to his right about 45 degrees.
How about now?
There you
There you
Oh,
go.
yeah.
I turned it up.
go. Works too.
Good. All right. Thank y'all. All right. Category B, medical directors and physician designees. Item 1, it is the duty of the hospice medical director to fill the gaps when attending physicians cannot do it, are unwilling, or don't feel qualified. And there are many PCPs that really don't feel qualified to, they may want to stay on the case and handle the general medical stuff, but not the comfort measures. There are a lot that just don't feel comfortable with hospice and they want to back away. I had an agency today call me about, one of my patients that needed to be admitted, referred by oncology. And I told them I would be happy to work with their medical directors together, so, there's all kind of different ways that these things will play out, but it's on us as the directors to make sure that all the gaps are filled in. And so we need to make sure that there is an appropriate attending. I think it'd be the primary care person, if that's what they choose. If they don't want to prescribe, then we got to step in and help them. If they don't want to attend, we need to step in and help them. But it's our duty to fill in the gaps depending on what the attending does or does not want to do. It should be the attending's choice.
Yes.
Okay. Point 2, medical directors are responsible for doing the right thing for patient care. What you said, Dustin.
That's right.
Just do the right thing like we're taught in medical school. Point 3, if a medical director assumes the role of prescribing to a patient that does not have an attending physician serving on the team, a relationship should be established with that patient through a home visit or telemedicine, including audio only, if that's the situation that we find ourselves in. But that we need to, as we talked about before, we need to establish a connection between us leading the IDG and the patient or their families or surrogates if we don't have the attending on the team.
I believe that the way that the third bullet is worded is the spirit of what we had in our last meeting. And I think that I think it's acceptable and should be acceptable to anyone medical directing.
And like we talked about last time, we've learned so much through the COVID crisis. I had to do 2 visits today by audio only, just because there was no other way to do it. And they're still good visits. I accomplished what I needed to and took care of the patient. I'm going to do, CMS guidelines required to go to the highest level that you can, but you can revert back to audio only if that's all you got.
That's right.
And so, as I follow this regulation, I will try to do a telemedicine video chat if I can. If they're out in the boonies, which you don't have to leave Vicksburg very far, and you're in the boonies, then it may just have to be a phone to phone call. But there needs to be connection. They need to have a chance to, to hear me, see me if possible, talk to me, ask me questions, and know that I'm a real person who knows about their mama.
Dan.
Yeah.
On number 3, I know this is a 10,000-foot flyby kind of view of everything, but I would include in there that an office visit, a home visit, telemedicine, or an audio only, because a lot of these patients do have the ability to still participate in an office visit.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we talked about that. That's a good point. If everybody agrees, we'll add that. We actually had some doctors, and I don't know why they thought at some point they thought we were demanding an office visit and were calling the ambulance to take them to the doctor's office. No, I have hospice patients that I see, routinely in the office. They're palliative care. They still want to come to see me at the office, and that's highly appropriate. But there reaches a point with all of them where they just can't anymore. And I do admit, it's not uncommon at all, Ken, that I do admit patients that are already bedbound. I haven't been involved in their care. They're referred to us. They're already bedbound, and so I'm gonna have to do some type of telemedicine visit with them.
No, I get that,
Yeah.
but it's just when you were listing it out here, you left out office visit, which would be like ideal probably if they have the ability to do an office visit, then do an office visit. If not, then a home visit. If not, then telemedicine. If not, then audio. So that's kind of the point I was making.
Okay, very good. Any
I think
discussion?
There's one caveat, because when you craft a regulation, it really is almost to the point that every word matters. And there aren't any wasted words, everything's there for a reason. And I think that we should make it clear, because some of these patients, when we get them, they are already either severely demented or not able to really establish on their own behalf their part of the relationship. And so communicating about the patient and seeing the patient, with their responsible party, could, how we have family visits times outside of the patient's presence. But I mean, the spirit is we want to see the patient visually some point if possible. And if that's not possible through the technology, then we would revert to audio only. But you can't audio only with somebody that can't talk to you. So that would be establishing rapport with the patient's responsible party and letting them ask those questions.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Dustin. And I would say, from what I know, that we have had complaints from responsible parties, and these were with patients that, wouldn't be aware of what was going on, but the family knew what was going on and the family wasn't happy. So you're exactly right. The patient, if possible, or their family principal parties. All right. Anything else? Okay. And item 4, CMS defines the role of the medical director as a coordinating role that does not necessarily require personal contact with patients. I mean, we have the standards there. if the medical director assumes that role, shouldn't he or she establish a physician-patient relationship? And that's what we've been talking about. So again, these are not meant to be regulatory bullet points. These are just, this is what we agree upon. And actually, Ken, one of the ways that I think would be the easiest way to look at this, if all the stuff that we agree to, if CMS has strong regulations and guidance, then, allowing us to follow that will cover a lot of these issues, very broadly to, if physicians and if medical directors are following CMS guidelines, they're going to be fine. If they're not going to be fine, or they're at risk. All right, so any questions about medical directors, physician designees, establishing the doctor-patient relationship, any of that?
That we talked in 3 and 4, Dr. Edney, about, and again, these are just guidances, but we mentioned a lot about establishing the relationship. But it seems, I'm trying to remember the last meeting. I'm not trying to, I'm actually thinking out loud. I'm trying to remember the distinction we made between evaluation and how that fit into the language of the regulation versus examination. Is that kind of touched on or alluded to in number 3 or 4 in any way?
Well, for me, Dustin, and we can be as explicit as we need to be. But again, with all the telemedicine experience that we've gained through COVID, I know all of us have established doctor-patient relationships without a physical examination, other than observing the video component, if we were able to. So I have wanted to shy away from words like history and physical, and stick. Regulation actually said, evaluation.
That's right.
Because that's we are proposing to allow the physician the discretion. Do you want to do it in the office? Do you want to go to the bedside? Do you, as the director or attending, want to send a mid-level? That should, in my opinion, that should be your decision, not your agency's decision. That should be your decision of whether you want to utilize a mid-level, or do you want to do it yourself through telemedicine, reverting to audio only if you have to. With that in line, you're going to evaluate them to the best of your ability based on what situation you're in. So if they're in the office, we're going to check them out like we always do and document it. If we're doing telemedicine, when I do a telemedicine visit, I'll kind of document what I can see. And then if I fall back on an audio only, sometimes the only thing I can tell is how the breathing is over the phone, or, what they sound like. But I just document the best that I can based on the situation I'm in.
I think professionally, you're trying to establish whatever you can to take care of this patient. And you don't want to build too many parameters into it so that not even you can satisfy those parameters.
That's right.
And I remember, I was listening intently to the situation that you were talking about in terms of the agency sending out mid-levels. And I've heard that from other family medicine medical directors. And to be honest, I was not sensitive to that happening because I won't let it happen in my agency. And so some of that's going to have to be internal work that you're going to have to plant your flag with your agency and say, look, no, I don't want a mid-level going out. I'm going to do it myself at whatever level I choose. Or there may be a time that you do want to send them. But that, we can't regulate that aspect in terms of what an agency does. That has to be between you and the agency. But very clearly, I think most of us would agree that should be your decision and my decision and Justin's decision.
My personal preference is, of course, we'll have to wait for the regulation to come out at some point, but as long as I've got telemedicine and can fall back on audio, I'm kind of personally a more hands-on guy.
Mhm.
But there, as you say, there are medical directors, and I know many of them that would just because of their own workflow and the relationships they have with their mid-levels, they would rather establish care through their mid-level. And as I understand, uh, it, I think the spirit of the last meeting was that was appropriate, but I can't really remember everybody's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about that more, and we need to definitely have a consensus
Okay.
on that. All right, everybody okay with category B?
Yes.
Okay. All right, C, in terms of referring. Item 1, primary care doctors should know that their patient has been admitted to hospice care. That was part of the intention of the regs. Everybody's in agreement with that. That stops the run around the primary care physician behavior. Initiating conversations with your patient about considering hospice care is appropriate. Nothing in the rules or regs is ever going to be meant not to allow you to talk to your patients about a service that you think they need, just like home health, hospitalization, anything. It's absolutely appropriate for you to initiate, for you to say, I do it all the time, that Miss So-and-so, this is more than home health can handle now. I need to move up the level of care. And many times I have to explain what hospice even is, and I'm the initiator of that conversation. But that is appropriate. Comments? Dustin, you got a look on your face.
No, I'm good. I'm reading as you're talking. I'm sorry. I've got
Okay.
a face when I read.
Okay. There are federal laws that address improper actions regarding referrals for personal gain. The regulation could accomplish its goal by reminding licensees that violations of these laws are grounds for the board to take action. And Ken, that's kind of what I was pointing at. There were a lot of things that were giving us as board members heartburn in terms of behavior out there that are already against federal law or against CMS rules and regs. And I think we could probably cast a wide net by that somehow incorporating a statement like that into the rules and regs instead of getting
Into the nitty gritty.
nitpicky about it. Just say, look, if you're in violation of federal law, that's grounds for us to take action. What do you think, Ken?
All right, so that's going to create a real gray area right there when you put that in there, because the very fact that, well, now we have Mississippi state law, and we temporarily changed our regulation to match the law, but just because it's in Mississippi state law or just because it's in our regulation doesn't mean it's consistent with federal law. And if you go back and read federal law, it's very clear that they expect for us an established doctor-patient relationship to occur before any prescriptions are made. So if you say, well, Mississippi law says we're not going to require that, and our regulations say we're not going to require that, but then you say if you violate federal law, you could be in trouble, it's kind of opposing each other.
Well, what we could do, we could specifically talk about things such as self-referral, recruitment, a lot of the things that we were trying to get at, and we're maybe not having the best language for it, but self-referral in terms of referring, and self-referral really, it's not as, we don't want there to be confusion. There's nothing against CMS rules or regs for me to refer a patient to the agency that I work with, as long as the patient knows the choices and I disclose that I'm the director, and that as long as I'm disclosing these things, just like I do with home health and everything else. Usually, as soon as I disclose I'm medical director, that's where they want to go. But when you disclose that, honestly, then that's not that's not a self-referral kick. We're not talking about kickbacks. The recruitment is an issue, but as I was thinking, it's not just an issue with hospice. Recruitment is actually more of a problem with home health. And
Yeah.
recruitment's more of a problem with Medicare HMOs. I mean, they probably recruit more than anybody. And so there is a lot of recruitment going on out there. Recruitment is a problem. Recruitment is unethical. There's already federal guidance on that. So there are things that we can talk, we can think through this more, but there are times instead of just, I know the language that we had promulgated was confusing and scary to some doctors, and they were afraid that they couldn't do what they needed to do. But basically, if something is against CMS rules and regs, against state, federal law, that enables the board the ability to take action. Now, obviously, if we have a rule or a reg ourselves that's different, then we're not going to take action on that.
My only point is we just want to be careful not to create a regulation that contradicts itself.
That's a very good point.
Dr. Edney, I'm looking at this draft and it says federal laws addressing improper actions regarding referrals.
Right.
And then below that, we have a reference to a specific part of CMS, federal code. So as long as we don't just say, like Dr. Cleveland just pointed out, all federal laws, if we're specific with which federal laws we're trying to pinpoint.
Exactly. I agree. And I think Ken's point is well taken. My thought is the more that we can defer to CMS or to state or federal law, then, that makes it more clear to doctors doing the right thing. Because Dustin, you've not intentionally been breaking any law, but giving us the ability to deal with the issues that we're getting complaints about. All right, questions?
I'm a little confused about several of the things that we just talked about. Everything we just mentioned brought more questions than answers for me, and it's probably just because there are some things I don't understand, and I'm willing to accept that. But it would seem to make sense that if a physician was breaking a law, that the medical board would be able to take action on it. The only part about C that really frustrates me is that first point, to where I agree 100% that primary care doctors should know that their patient has been admitted to hospice care. The way the current regulations is worded is it puts that notification responsibility on the physician. And, what I would like to do is to be able to have some acceptable means through that the board would approve of, to offload that responsibility to the hospice company that you're working for. And so if there was something in the regulation that physicians, if there was an agreement in writing that they could have these notifications be made the responsibility of their hospice company that they work for, then that would kind of take some burden off of physicians, and really it would kind of become standard of care in Mississippi. And you'd kind of have all, every one of us, as we're looking at our hospice contracts, would make sure that wording is in there. You got to let the other doctor know.
So Dustin, just to let you know, that the issue with that is we don't regulate hospice agencies. And so we have no authority over them to tell them that they have to do that.
Right. Now,
I will just tell you, and I think that anybody sitting in this seat would agree in the future or in the past or whatever, that if you have it agreed upon with your hospice agency that when when you admit a patient to the hospice agency, they're going to send a letter to the attending physician that that patient has known for their whole life. That's going to pass muster with the board. I mean, they have been notified, and whether the letter actually came from you or whether it came from the hospice, it still serves the purpose of notifying the attending physician that's taking care of that patient their whole life. And that's all we're really after. But we have to write it in such a way that the physician is the one that's responsible, because you're the one that's our licensee. You're the one that we regulate. We don't regulate the hospice agency.
Dr. Cleveland, I like to automate things, to keep things simple. And the process that I see in my mind moving forward is, when this is all said and done, and that part actually is, because we've got a regulation that says it right now. In writing, the hospice company is going to take that responsibility from me. And if for ever any reason I have to stand before the board and explain something, maybe those letters weren't going out or whatever, I'm going to say, look, I thought they were going out. I intended for them to go out. Here's where it was supposed to go out.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? I
Sure.
won't be able to do that.
I do.
I'm sorry.
Hang on a second. So, Dustin, I do see what you're saying. But once again, the responsibility from the medical licensure standpoint falls on the physician. Okay. So I personally, under the scenario you just gave, I don't think the board would accept that as a acceptable explanation of, I thought it was happening. The simple solution to this, if you want automated, is to have a one-page letter that the hospice agency could fill in the patient's name, and you could sign it at your multidisciplinary group meetings that y'all have once a week or whatever. You could sign the letter every time you're at one of those, and then they mail it for you. I mean, isn't that how you do controlled prescriptions? You sign them at those meetings and stuff like that. I mean, what would the harm be in signing a letter at that meeting?
Well, I mean, it's increased burden, honestly. But I mean, I want what you want. We're kind of discussing about how it happens.
Well, let's quit talking about hospice for a second. And for y'all that are bored with this conversation, just bear with me for a minute or two here. You're a family practice doctor, is that right? Internal medicine?
Family medicine.
Family practice. Okay. If you send a patient to a surgeon because you believe they have a hernia, don't you like to get a letter back from that surgeon saying, I'm going to take Mr. Smith to the operating room and fix his right inguinal hernia? So that you have it documented in your chart that patient got there and the surgeon saw him.
Yeah.
The next time you see the patient, Mr. Smith had his hernia fixed.
That's right. But I don't see general surgeons getting reprimanded by the board for not sending those letters. You see what I mean? That's this.
No, I'm just pointing out something to you that the burden is not that difficult. I mean, I used to, at the end of my office day every day, I used to dictate 30, 40 of these letters, I mean, and so it could be automated to the point where your hospice has a one-page letter that you just fill in the blank and you sign the bottom, and that would meet the spirit of the regulation.
Right. But the only way I personally know if the letter was sent is if I put a stamp on it myself and take it to the mailbox.
Well, that's true in your office too, right? I mean, you send letters from your office every day, probably. How do you know all those are sent? Because you trust your office staff to do it.
I do trust my office staff, but when my license is on the line, which is what we're talking about, that's a little bit different. And
Yeah.
so that's the reason I'm making a stipulation here.
And I understand, Dustin, that like right now, my hospice agency is still complying with the regulation that was pulled back. We're still continuing to do what we were doing. But you bring up something good that I've got to think about, because the way we do it is they generate the letter and I sign it and they send it.
We're doing the same thing.
so I'm gonna have, but it's still my responsibility to make sure that's done. And so I'm gonna have to think through, how do I make sure that it's done in a way that's not burdensome. The only thing, what the board's trying to accomplish is what you want, and that is not to cut the primary care doctor out of the loop.
That's right.
I actually this week had a agency call to notify me that they were admitting one of my patients and asking me to attend. I was very happy to have gotten that call, and I handled it. I didn't care if I got a letter or not. They notified me. I was happy and pleased and happy to engage with them in the patient's care. That's something we can think about, because I agree with Ken. It's my responsibility as a licensee to make sure it's done. If we think it's important, and we're hearing a common theme that it is important, then the board has to. We're the only people out there that can enforce it, and Ken's right. The only people that we can enforce anything on are our licensees.
That's right.
But I hear what you're saying in terms of unnecessary burden. And so I don't think signing a letter is unnecessary burden, but it is on me to make sure that letter's going out. So it may be that I need to pull that letter out of my packet and mail it through my office. I've just been signing it and assuming that it was going out, but that Ken's right. That's on me. So that's something for all of us to think individually, how I want to manage my office and you want to manage yours. But again, all this, part of it is what we're being compensated for too. It's not like we're volunteering as medical directors.
You also have to depend on the post office to deliver that letter. And we know.
Hey, Jerry Ann.
List it on and off. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're acting like one time, we're acting like if a physician one time didn't get a letter because one patient got admitted to a hospice and they weren't notified, that would cause an action on the license. And that's just not how this system works. I mean, it would have to be, 20 times, 30 times. It would have to be a pattern of intentional neglect that this was getting done before it would even rise to the level of opening an investigation on it, much less finding enough information on the investigation to bring it to the board. And I think it's hard to explain until you really have taken a peek behind the curtain and understand how all this works. But
so Dustin, one thing to understand is Ken and our investigative staff have so many big fish to fry. We would be upset with them if they were wasting investigative time on issues about a letter. However, if there were 5 complaints that came in about my care to hospice patients, then each one of the rules and regs would be there for them to look at my practice pattern. So Ken's right. That's not going to be what's investigated, but it would be one thing looked at to see how well are you complying with the rules and regs.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, let's just say that I got 3 complaints that Dustin wasn't notifying primary care physicians when he took over their care in hospice. The first thing that's going to happen is you're either going to get a phone call or a letter from me going, "Hey, Dustin, I'm getting these complaints. Can you respond to them and let me know what's going on?" And that's going to send up a flag for you to let you know you need to check your systems and see why these people aren't getting notified. I probably send out 10 letters a week asking people to respond to complaints that don't rise to the level of an investigation, but I can't just throw them away either. I need to get the MD's response to the complaint to see what their side of the story is. And so, your license wouldn't be in jeopardy over something like this. I guess eventually if it kept getting escalated, it could be, but initially it would just be a please explain this kind of letter that you would get.
I wonder, And I won't belabor the point. I've heard I'm in agreement with 99% of everything you guys are saying. So we certainly aren't arguing here, but I wonder if maybe it was more of a policy type of an issue instead of, a regulation sounds like it has a lot more teeth to it than something less than that.
Yeah.
So
I'm
let
going
me
to
ask-
interject. Sorry. I think this brings up a really valid point when Dr. Cleveland said we don't regulate hospice. We may want to start a running list of things that, and this is a prime example where perhaps the Board of Health, who does regulate hospice, should consider placing a requirement on hospice that there is a standing protocol to inform the primary care doctor. We could have a running list of suggestions from our committee to the Board of Health for their consideration to change in their regulations.
I'm sorry, Justin, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I had it raised, but Dr. Cleveland kind of answered it. I was going to ask, basically, would a physician lose their license from just one time? It's my understanding that it has to be something that's, pure neglect. And if the board sees that you're doing everything that you can and you appropriately documenting, then one violation wouldn't cause a problem. But Dr. Cleveland was in my spirit, so we're good.
Okay, I'm sorry, Justin, I didn't catch. So just holler at me, jump up and down if you have to.
I think you're absolutely right. I look back on my practice of 35 years and think, damn, I didn't do everything right. So somewhere along there, we've done all these things.
Well, I mean, when I was moonlighting over in Vicksburg, and I got reported to the medical board back in the 1990s, and it was because I didn't give, of all things, I didn't give pain medicine to a back pain, because she was a drug sick. And it was simple. I just wrote a letter and told them about the visit, and they dismissed. And that goes on constantly, so.
Ken, I've always regretted having done that to you. But that's right. That, that Ken would have to speak, but it's rare that kind of stuff ever percolates up to the board level. Dustin, those are appropriate comments, and I would have no problem saying it's the responsibility of the medical director to notify the primary care physician, and that be on me how I do that and how I document that I did that. It may be that, there's somebody that you see in the hospital all the time. You can say, hey man, I've got this referral. Is that okay with you? And then you document it, or pick up the phone and do it, or do a letter. But the thing is, the spirit of what we want is for PCPs to know their patients have been admitted to hospice.
I mean, one of the most common complaints we get about hospice is a primary care physician didn't know their patient had been admitted. I kid you not. That's one of the most common.
And you experienced that yourself, haven't you, Justin?
Yeah, that's the only problem we're trying to solve there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I don't belabor the point. It's just that discussion we just had, I thought was helpful. And
okay. All right, good. All right, so let's move on. D is kind of more of, we were having the conversation about rolling up as much as we can by referring to CMS rules and regs or state and federal law, or the big items that maybe that gives the board grounds to take action without specifying the language that was confusing to people. So Ken makes the good point. We have to make sure that it's not anything in conflict with what we're trying to do. But I think that probably the easiest one is recruitment. It's without having to get into the argument. Well, what about everybody else who's recruiting? We just say, if we get a complaint about recruitment, we can refer to CMS rules and regs that is unethical, and we have the grounds to act on it without having a specific rule about recruitment itself. there's some things that we can roll up together. That is a thought. We can either be specific or we can refer to CMS and state and federal law. What are y'all's thoughts?
I think this would be a good place to add in what Dr. Cleveland said about a pattern of intentional neglect. So like CMS regulations are required to be met in patterns of intentional neglect of those standards or grounds for board action, so that everybody knows, there's a little bit of comfort in that. If I get one thing wrong, I could lose my license, versus if I am intentionally neglecting these standards, I will be called in.
I think that's great language to.
That's-
Yeah, write that down.
Got it.
I think it's ludicrous.
That helps these
No, that-
regulations not be scary. We don't want to create.
Yes, exactly. We want them to be intentional and profitable in the ability to regulate this, but not, this is not anti-physician or anti-medical director at all. This is dealing with complaints that the board gets.
And for Dustin and Justin and Jerry Ann, who are not on the board or work at the board or whatever, just so y'all know, that would actually be a very high level of proof to obtain to get to intentional neglect. I mean, that would be a high bar to get over. It would be extremely difficult, in my opinion, to get that high. So
I like that as well. Oh, good grief. And my phone just dropped the bullet point. Who's got the next bullet point? Well,
I can
pull it
read
back up.
for you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
He says, if language regarding the IDG meetings remains, the requirement should be to participate, not quote, attend, end quote.
And that was just getting to the point you made that, the issue is about participating and attending, not physically being there. And I don't think anybody had any issue with that.
yeah, we would all agree we're participating today, but we're not physically attending.
Right?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. What's the next one, Dustin?
We're on F for prescribing. Number 1 says CMS regulations reflect that the paramount responsibility of hospice care is to expediently control patient pain. And I agree.
Okay.
Number 2 says it is appropriate for medical directors to initiate a prescription in the case of emergencies. Yes, everyone would agree. Number 3 says if a patient does not have an attending physician, it is appropriate for the medical director to continue prescribing until a relationship is established between the patient and a physician member of the IDG. Okay.
That makes sense?
It does.
Okay.
Number 4 says it is appropriate for medical directors to prescribe without the need for additional requirements when there is an attending physician serving on the team that has an established relationship with the patient. And that is the last.
That makes sense.
That's the last one
That makes sense to everybody?
Yep,
Okay.
good to me.
Right. I'm good with that.
All right. So any thoughts on the whole package?
I'm still confused about whether or not this subcommittee is in agreement that there is a mechanism to establish a relationship between a physician and a patient through a mid-level. You understand what I mean?
Yes. That would be, what we have talked about as a group is that would be at your discretion.
Okay. All right.
So
I mean, right now, right now people have been, quote, establishing relationships through registered nurses.
Well, no, I'm okay with it. You know, the requirement being a mid-level. What the stickler is for me is I think it's important. Not that I want, but I think it's important for the physician to be able to establish through the mid-level. Not that that would be my practice, but I think it's important to be able to do that so that the physician can retain prescriptive authority. And if the relationship is established through the mid-level, they could do that.
Yeah, are you talking about to be the primary prescriber to the patient or just a backup prescriber?
I think that, you know, if the relationship is established through the mid-level, then you would be allowed to be the primary prescriber.
Okay.
Yeah, we
I
had
think
a
that would be worth the
conversation
debate.
earlier.
I'm sorry, Dr. Houston?
I think Ken and I had this conversation earlier, and I think I need some help because my takeaway was that if the mid-level was going to be the one writing the opioids, that he or she could establish that relationship and do the visit. But if I was the one who was mainly going to be doing the prescribing, I should be doing that.
What is your opinion in terms of proper practice in hospice as a IDG?
Yeah. Well, the fact is we have one nurse practitioner who just does a little bit of everything. Our company is not one who has nurse practitioners who have done all the face-to-face, do everything, and all the medical director does is sign where they tell him to sign. We're not like we're hands-on. So I would be the one, regardless of how many mid-levels we had, I would be the one establishing the relationship because I would be the one writing the prescriptions.
Okay, so there's two ways to look at it. And Dustin, thank you for bringing this up because this is an important point. I know the board's attitude before was whoever's going to be the primary prescriber needs to be the one to establish the relationship. And there were some who felt that someone should be able to establish the rate. Someone on the team with prescriptive authority should be able to establish the relationship for the team in the IDG approach. And then COVID hit, and before COVID, it was like somebody's got to do something at the bedside or high-level telemedicine. COVID hit, showed us you can't do high-level telemedicine in half of the state. And so thinking has changed among a lot of people on the front lines. So now if we're going to allow telemedicine at the highest level, including reverting to audio only, that takes a lot of burden off of doctors that we were allowing mid-levels to go do. So we can either look at, someone, on the team establishing the relationship for the doctors on the team, or if you're going to prescribe, then you need to establish a relationship. Those are two different things. And Ken, there's another, I've run into this recently. There are primaries who want to maintain being attending, but they don't want to prescribe the comfort medicines.
Yeah.
My thought was the attending is on the team as part of the IDG. Well, there's a relationship with a doctor on the IDG, but he or she's not going to be prescribing. So there's all kind of machinations of this thing.
No, technically the attending's on the IDG, but we all know that attendings, if they're not a medical director, really don't participate. At least with our hospice, they don't participate in IDT team or the planning or anything.
So I do have a recommendation for this committee as a whole. And then I wish I'd have thought of this earlier, but since I just thought of it now, I'll share it with you now, is that we don't really need any major changes in the regulations in the way they're written. I mean, we might need a few small tweaks and things. What we need is, and this could be recommended by the committee to the board and be done is a declaratory opinion that states in these situations, then this would be the proper way to act. And so we have several, if you go to our website, you'll see we have started posting declaratory opinions made by the board. And so in a declaratory opinion, you can kind of elaborate on what your thought patterns are, like, can a mid-level establish the relationship? And we could elaborate on that more than you can do in regulations, because it's a declaratory opinion of the board. And it would allow, it would allow for more, discussion to be had it'd be on the board's website, it'd be an opinion of the board. Yeah. And
so Ken, if this group recommended to the Rules and Reg Committee and they agreed and the board agreed that anyone with prescriptive authority on the IDG making the establishing the relationship allows for appropriate prescribing for everybody on the IDG, then you could do a declaratory statement that says that, and we don't have to change anything.
And we might have to make some small tweaks, but we wouldn't have to make overall big changes. And so we might just have to change a little bit of the language to clear it up. And then we make it even more clear by putting out a declaratory opinion on it.
I got you. Yeah. So, I mean, the important thing is that the questions and concerns brought up by doctors in the field, like represented on this committee, are dealt with in an appropriate and fair and transparent manner.
And I think the way you do that in a declaratory opinion is you take each one of these issues and you say, will a physician's license be suspended because a primary care doctor didn't get a letter of notification? And the board would say no, that, the most likely chain of events would be that they would receive a letter from the board and they would have a chance to respond to it. And that if it continued to be a problem, then it could get elevated. But just, and I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head here. We could certainly be more eloquently spelled out than what I'm saying, but. No,
because what I've talked to Charlie about and to Tom about, because my thought is simply to bring a consensus opinion from experts in hospice care and medical direction to the Rules and Reg Committee. And then, that committee will take those recommendations and deal with it. And a declaratory opinion is a great way to go about it.
It really is. I want to explain to the members of the committee who aren't on the board what a declaratory opinion is. It is actually a statutorily created process for the public to question regulations of a regulatory board for their interpretation. You can ask a board for a declaratory opinion. There are set timelines by which the agency has to respond or refuse to respond. But in most situations, a board would respond unless some kind of legal action were, ongoing. Those declaratory opinions are to be posted for the public and can be used as a quote, I guess, form of defense or justification for an action or interpretation of a regulation by the board's licensees. So I think that is a very effective way to get to some more of the expectations of the board without it, being in regulatory language and something that is more, just a clearer way to kind of direct licensees on how to respond in those situations.
Could I explain my intention behind bringing this up? It's the reason is because almost by any means necessary, I feel that it is important for the physician and not the nurse practitioners to be writing these dangerous medicines. I feel like a physician who feels that he's retained some competency in doing this for and offering this service for his patients would be better off than what I can see happening, among some hospice companies with mid-levels who aren't properly trained, and all of a sudden they're writing fentanyl patches and different things like that for even possibly some of my patients, if the right scenario were to happen. And so I want to make every way possible for the physician to establish the care, or establish the relationship and retain that prescriptive authority. I'm going to personally be doing it over telemedicine and audio, but if there's a nurse practitioner that's on the IDG and has a collaborating relationship with the physician as his extender, in my mind, I feel like that is good enough to establish a relationship, but that I'm not the one that makes all the rules.
So opinions about that question, that's actually a very good point of allowing a mid-level to establish the relationship, but the physician do the primary prescribing, who obviously has more experience doing that.
That's
But what versus requiring whoever's going to be doing the prescribing to actually make the contact?
That's right.
Okay, so Justin, your opinion?
I'm okay with that. I think, the mid-level can initiate the relationship, but the authorization of controlled substances need to be done by the provider, by the physician.
By the physician.
Yeah.
Dr. Houston?
And that could be spelled out in a declaratory opinion,
Right.
Dan, without changing the.
Absolutely. I want to be able to take, Ken, I want to be able to take a consensus opinion to the committee on the issue so that y'all can do that. Dr. Houston?
I'm probably going to take the other side. I think the physician needs to be the one establishing the relationship and running
Okay.
what
All
we
right.
do. I think that works well. I just see so many agencies, the nurse practitioners or the RNs are in charge, and the attending or the medical director does nothing. I don't think it's this group of people meeting, but there are a lot of those out there that I see with the attendings, the medical directors are just doing what they're told so they can collect their check.
Okay. Dr. Joyner?
Well, I'm old school. I really think that docs ought to see their own patients. They ought to establish their own relationships. So I agree with Jerry. I realize things are changing, but there it is.
Dr. Cleveland, what's the regulation for pain management physicians? Aren't they allowed to have their nurse practitioners do an initial, but at some point they have to see that patient or something to that effect?
Yeah, we changed that around. I mean, I can try to pull it up real quick, but I think they, initially when 2640 was rewritten kind of to say and came out, the patient couldn't get a narcotic prescription at the first visit unless they were seen by the physician. And they essentially said that was impossible for them to do. And so it was changed to allow 90 days, I think, 90 days worth of narcotics before they had to see the attending.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And that's coming off the top of my head.
That was my recollection. Also, I want to point out one thing. CMS regulations do allow an APRN to serve as the attending physician. So while we're considering this policy point, we need to bear that in mind as well. Because we've had this assumption that the attending physician would always be a medical doctor, but CMS does allow APRNs and PAs to serve as the attending.
All right, so we don't have consensus.
But they can be the attending, yes.
Yeah. All right, so we have a split set of opinions. I would say, I mean, Ken, Tom, y'all help me. My understanding, the board's opinion back pre-COVID, we've not talked about it in quite a while. The board's opinion was whoever established the relationship needs to be the primary prescriber.
That's correct.
And so I don't have a consensus opinion from this group.
But that's,
So-
well, so, you know, Dan, I think you can tell the whole board that when you do your presentation to the board on what the group decided. And then the board as a whole can decide.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're simply going to provide information. Point well taken. So Dustin, that gets to the point that, you know, if physicians want to use a mid-level, then the mid-level is going to have to keep prescribing. Physicians who don't, like you, will need to pick up the, you know, to do telemedicine at the highest level you can, which is what you want to do anyway. You know, I think you would have, there's going to be split opinion on the board, a split opinion in this group. So probably we'll fall back to what we said originally, I guess. Which is, right. But we've come such a long way in terms of what we would be willing to allow to establish the relationship that it really should not be a burden.
Right. Well, I agree with you, and I so gently disagree with Dr. Houston. What Dr. Joyner was saying, I very readily agree with. I do agree that physicians should do their own work, and honestly, I don't see enough of that happening in some different groups. What my opinion is really that the most competent person should be, you know, and the most able person should be prescribing those dangerous medicines.
Yeah, I agree.
That's really the angle that I'm taking. It's not to deprive the patient or anything. I see different amounts and varied training abilities and such among the mid-levels that bothers me. It scares me for the patient sometimes.
You know, and then outcome that I had not thought about before, because I'll be honest, it doesn't give me heartburn to send, you know, my mid-level to the bedside and glean the information and bring it back to me and me review it and sign off on it and take over prescribing. That just doesn't bother me.
That's how I
but you know, an unintended good consequence would be if the board maintains its position that whoever does the relationship needs to prescribe, then there's not going to, I bet there's not going to be many of us sending mid-levels to the bedside. I think most of us will be, you know, picking up telemedicine or the phone or whatever we have to do so we can prescribe. And that's a good thing.
Well, let's remember also that the board made it so that if a mid-level is at the house and they give you a phone call while they're there, that counts as a visit. I mean, so
good point.
You know, I mean, we've relaxed the regulations to a point where it's not a very high bar to get over to become the prescribing physician.
And Ken, that's a great point right there, because I had forgotten that, but that could be another declaratory opinion that makes it very clear without us having to jump through a bunch of regulatory hoops.
Right. To your point, Dr. Cleveland, it didn't have to be a mid-level support in the home. It could be, as I remember the regulation, it says with nursing support in the home. Is that right?
Telemedicine with nursing support in the home.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to point out our point 1 under prescribing, y'all have CMS regulations reflect that the paramount responsibility of hospice care is to expediently control patient pain. So, you know, I think if that is our number 1 priority under prescribing, then it's pretty clear the intent is to make sure that pain management occurs, and then we're giving, you know, guidance beyond that.
Yeah. And the only other way I know to make that any more clear than what we have said 15 different ways of what the board's intent is, and that is to alleviate pain immediately, is to do a declaratory opinion.
Yeah,
that's the only thing we haven't done, and people haven't gotten it thus far.
y'all, I hate to, if y'all will, I need to be excused. I have a teenager performing in Hattiesburg tonight and I got to get on the road. So
Be gone, my friend. Thank you.
I appreciate everybody.
Safe
Thank you.
travels.
Okay, so with your permission, does anybody have heartburn on anything else? Then with your permission, I will present the consensus that we have on everything that we do, and this one item that we did not have consensus, but we thought a certain declaratory opinion would fix. And then I think we'll be done. I am going to ask, I hate Ken jumped off before I said this, but I'll talk to the powers that be. I think something that would be smart and probably well received is that we stay together as a group for the near future until all this kind of sorts out, just as an advisory group, so that if the board has questions or thoughts or not sure what to do, they could kick it to us and we just give a quick opinion. We do that with, we have a PA advisory group and things like that, just until we get through this. If you'd be willing to serve, it would not be regular meetings. It would just meet as needed. And the board may not want to do that, but that would be one recommendation, is that this is such a good group, well-respected experts in the field, that I think the board could benefit.
I would highly recommend that to the board if I were asked. I think it's a great idea.
Questions, thoughts before we close?
So we're going to expect maybe some form of response from the board back to the ad hoc committee on theirs. Yeah. Okay.
I'll make sure that happens. Again, thank y'all so very much. I can't tell you how important your service has been and how much you have helped move this forward. I think in a very positive way. Dustin, I hope for family medicine, that's what we want. And I hope that you can communicate that what our thoughts and intentions and expectations are.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for being so open and kind.
Thank you, Dustin, for serving. Thank you, Tom, Jerry Ann, Justin. Thank you so much. Thank you, staff. We appreciate y'all always. And if there's nothing else, I'll declare us adjourned, and I'll present this to the Rules and Regs Committee in November. Ms. Francis, if you can help me make that happen, please. Thank you. Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.